I'm more apt to believe that we are in touch with something on that level than a Bigfoot that we can't find. But with that said, I can certainly believe that there might be something in the ocean depths that we haven't found yet or seen.
I would
Now,
believe that.
is it a monster? I think a great white shark is a fucking monster.
Right.
Welcome to Splintered Spirits. I'm your host, Gary, and along with my nephew, John Santa from Santa Paranormal, we try to explore the potential answers to the question, what are spirits? Today I'm sitting down with one of the most respected skeptics on the planet when it comes to hauntings, monsters, and mysterious claims. Benjamin Radford is the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer, a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and the author or contributor to more than 20 books, including Investigating Ghosts, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, and Tracking the Chupacabra. He has written thousands of articles on critical thinking, folklore, and the strange corners of belief, and his work has appeared everywhere from CNN and ABC News to the New York Times and Scientific American. He has helped build some of the smartest conversations in this space through podcasts like Monster Talk and Squaring the Strange. Listen, on Splintered Spirits, we talk to believers, experiencers, investigators, and storytellers. And today, we talk to the guy who walks into the same haunted places, hears the same stories, and asks, where is the evidence? And what is really happening here? Some people love it. Some people are absolutely going to hate it. But if we are ever going to figure out what spirits are, we have to communicate with the other side. And I don't mean the other side, like the dead. I mean non-believers. Ben could not have been nicer and a real joy to talk to. Let's dive into the conversation. Ben, thank you so much for joining Splintered Spirits today.
Thanks for having me on. This is going to be fun.
Oh, yeah. Look, if nothing else, we have fun with this. I mean, we're talking about ghosts. I mean, if we can't have fun doing it, what do we, what's the...
Right. If you can't make ghosts interesting, then there's something wrong with you. So that's just how it is. Well, believer or skeptic, that's just the facts.
I tell you, man, and I'm glad you said it that way, because the way I started this was trying to understand what my nephew does. And he is a top TikTok influencer. He's not he's not an investigator. He'll tell you right out of the gate, he's not an investigator. He documents spirits. And really what he does, he just talks to his community. He has the spirit box apps or spirit boxes going, and they say things and he comments, or he got really famous. What really launched him was he was one of the first people to start walking cemeteries about 4 or 5 years ago. Nobody was really doing that, certainly not on social media before that. And then he would clean headstones and talk to spirits while doing it. And that was what really launched him. And the things and the responses he got were beyond the generic that I get when I download these apps,
Right?
Which is what makes it interesting, right? So, I got into it because I'm like, okay, dude, what is going on? Now you got 1 million people following you. It's like you could start your own religion or something. And this seems insane, so what's, and I wouldn't say I'm a skeptic. I think I'm curious, right? Like one of our things is to stay curious, and I want to know what's going on. And I'm talking to everyone with this podcast in terms of mediums and witches and parapsychologists and academics and authors and skeptics. And Ben, when I came across your name, and I've spoken to some other people at like CFI as well, what I really am fascinated about your background is you seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, you like to investigate claims as opposed to straight up dismissing them. And would you say that distinction is fair to say? And is that an important distinction to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Partly because, if the fact of the matter is that you don't know if you don't look. And that's true regardless of what it is, right? And so I've always been a believer in trying to find out. So, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I would see these stories about, the Loch Ness Monster and UFOs and ghosts and weird stuff everywhere. And I'm like, this is super cool. Like, I love this, right? This is spirits and dark forces and all sorts of crazy stuff around me. And then, but as I began consuming a lot of the stuff, a lot of the materials at the time, This was in the 80s. That's how old I am. And this is long before, of course, podcasts and YouTube and stuff. And what I found was that there was very little actual investigation. It was mostly people, I don't wanna say talking out of their ass, but it was just sort of like, "Hey, here's a story that I heard about some spirit that haunts, some hotel." Like, "Okay," right? And it wasn't really until you a couple decades later when you had the TAPS team going out there, you had the popularization of ghost hunting, things like that, then all of a sudden there's this sort of grassroots, explosion of interest in the paranormal and ghosts specifically. And at that point, I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. And, so the question then became, how can we approach these scientifically? Right. So we have the world around us. We have things that we know exist, right? We know that fish exist, right?
Yeah, right.
We know that trees
Yes.
exist. We know that electricity exists. There's lots of things that we know exist. And the question becomes, how do we know those things exist, and can we apply those same processes to ghosts? So that's always been my position: is you shouldn't just dismiss things out of hand because you don't know. On the other hand, you shouldn't just accept any random thing as being evidence of ghosts.
Was there one single moment early on, like a specific case or something or story that really pushed you hard into what people would categorize you as becoming a professional skeptic?
There were a couple. Some of them were cases that I'd read about as a kid, right? So I would pick up, the Reader's Digest Book of Mysteries. The kind
Sure,
I'm talking about, the
sure.
mysteries
Yeah,
of the unknown, all those sorts of things.
yeah.
And I used to love that. In fact, I've got a big stack of them behind me. That's those books right there. That's a third of my shelf of those. And
Mhm.
so I would see all these mysteries presented on, In Search Of, and, That's Incredible for those who remember, and just all these other shows. And so I would see just all, and it was like, it was almost like thrown it was like the kitchen sink approach, like, there's ghosts, there's mysteries, or it was all just sort of lumped together and thrown at the audience. And I'm like, well, in some ways that's kind of disingenuous because just because somebody somewhere doesn't know the explanation, all that means is that some random dude doesn't know the explanation. Doesn't mean that others haven't solved it, doesn't mean it hasn't been investigated. It doesn't mean that there aren't explanations for these things. So, I think one of the first ones that really jumped out at me was the case of the moving coffins in Barbados. Do you know the Chase Vault story?
No, tell me. I don't know. By the way, this is what I love because I don't know much about the paranormal. This is sort of my journey into learning about it. So tell me about this story in Barbados
Yeah, okay,
because
so I'll try and
this might be a reason why I never go to Barbados. By the way, but let's hear it.
So, yeah, so it's a long, it's kind of a complicated story. In some ways, it's a very simple story. I'll spare you the details, but basically, there was this famous case that I read about when I was 8 or 10 or something. I'm like, "Oh," 'cause I grew up here in New Mexico. I'm still in New Mexico, land of Breaking Bad and Bugs Bunny is what we're known
Love it.
for.
I've been loving Pluribus right now too. But go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I haven't seen it. I'm the last person on earth who hasn't seen it yet.
Oh, it's so
Um,
good. Yeah.
but so I grew up here, and so all these mysteries, they all seem very far away. It's like, the Loch Ness Monster is in Scotland. Where's Scotland? It's some island by the North Pole. Just like, as you're a kid, it's just some far away place, right?
Right.
And so there were all these mysteries that were intriguing to me because they were presented as mysterious and unknown and unexplainable, and maybe some of them were, but I was like, well, I was just a kid. I figure I can't really investigate this because, I'm 10. I live in the desert. I'm not in these places. But one of the ones that had jumped out at me was the Chase Vault story. And again, I'll give you the short version. So the story is that there's this vault, this cemetery in Barbados, and it's was owned by the Chase family. And the story is that the starting, I think, in the 1820s, I want to say, that there was this family, and they had this big stone slab, and they would bury, as because it was a family vault. Whenever somebody died, they would push aside this huge stone, and they'd put in the coffins.
Like Jesus.
Yes, very much like Jesus, but
Sure.
there was no returning in this case. And the story was that this happened a couple times, and the coffins would be moved. And so the story was that because, again, this family, and every now and then, some infant would die, and, for childhood disease, or some elderly relative, whatever else. And over the course of decades, every time they pushed aside this huge stone that took six grown men to move, the coffins had been moved. And the question is, how
And
could
this is
happen?
what years? What years were this?
This is 18. Well, it actually went over the course of several decades, but I think it was around
Got it.
1880s, 1870s, across, for many years. So this is sort of this is I won't say a mystery set in stone, but it's sort of a dusty mystery. In other words, it's not actively happening today. Anyway, so to answer your question, that was one of the first ones that really intrigued me, because, like, moving coffins, how is this possible, right? And so there's all these different explanations. Some people thought it was voodoo. Some people said it was grave robbers. But number one, nothing was stolen from the coffins. And number two, that you would have to move the stone, and then push it back. I mean, it would take 8 people to do this, and this is a small island in the Caribbean. Anyway, so as it happened, I actually went there and investigated. So I was there for a cruise, actually. And they're like, "Hey, do you want to go scuba diving?" I'm like, "No, I want to go investigate this famous mystery."
Okay.
So I spent most of the afternoon there. I took a bunch of photos, and I interviewed some people, and I think I did a pretty good job of solving the case. But that's one of the first ones where
Oh, can you tell me what? You can't leave me like that, bro. Why? How'd the coffins get moved?
So the short version of the story is that the legend itself is made up. In other words, the claims about the moving coffins, that is the legend. In other words,
Yeah.
it's not that the coffins were moved. No one knows how it happens. Like, the coffins weren't actually moved. That is
Sure.
itself the legend.
It's like when I blame my wife because I can't find my car keys, and I say that she moved them.
Exactly. And in some ways, I mean, there's even parallel to the Bell Witch story in Tennessee. And I've investigated many cases like that. There was one here in Albuquerque called the Chemo Theater Ghost. And it's one of the most famous haunted locations in the Southwest, certainly in New Mexico. And again, I'll spare you the whole story, but basically there was this, it's a theater. It's about maybe 5 miles from here. And it's allegedly haunted by a boy ghost. And if you don't leave donuts for him, because who doesn't love donuts?
Sure, everybody loves those.
Certainly boy
Yeah.
ghosts do.
Of course.
The story is that if you didn't leave donuts for him, then he would haunt the theater. So he would ruin performances there. So they had plays and things like that. And again, I grew up hearing about this story because it's every Halloween. Hey, do you know about the Chemo Theater Ghost? So I grew up. I'm like, is this true? It's like I'm a ghost investigator. I've written books on this. But I hadn't actually investigated one of the most famous cases in my home state. So once again, I circled back, and I did investigations, and I interviewed people there, and this goes back to what you're saying, Gary. It was not a matter of like, this can't be true. This is all bullshit. I'm like, I don't know if this is bullshit. I sincerely don't. I'm skeptical, but you don't know if you don't look. So those are a couple examples where, it was important to me to not just be the sort of dismissive debunker. I'm not a debunker at all.
Right.
In the course of investigating things, I sometimes debunk them, but I don't go
Right.
into them saying, this can't be true. Let me prove it.
I'm with you. I say this all the time. I find debunking unfun. It's and easy, right? And to me,
Well, it's also beside the point. I mean, if you
Right.
look, I mean, why? And this is one thing I've never understood. Like, when I or other skeptics get accused of being debunkers, my question is, why would I bother? Like, why?
Right.
If you're so certain that I know that ghosts don't exist, I've never claimed that ghosts don't exist, 'cause that's not a scientific claim. But
Mhm.
the question would be like, if you knew something was not true, and why would you spend days or weeks on that. You just be like, "Oh, this is not true. I'm not gonna waste my time."
Well,
I
but
mean,
there are certainly skeptics in your field specifically too that just believe that ghosts aren't real or spirits are real.
that
You
that's
know,
true. I mean,
that's
but I mean, you have to make a distinction between investigative skeptics and just sort of general people who think that ghosts don't exist. I
now. Do you
mean,
believe ghosts exist? Do
I
you believe in spirits?
yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be evasive, but it sort of depends. I mean, I haven't personally seen good evidence of ghosts.
Okay.
I wrote a book called Investigating Ghosts, shameless plug.
Yeah, I know
Um,
it's fine. Listen, I'm gonna plug all your stuff for sure.
yeah, no,
Don't worry about that.
I'm just
Yeah,
fun with you. But no,
yeah.
so it's like, do I believe they exist? I don't think so, but I'm certainly open to I'm open to suggestion. I'm always happy to hear to see evidence. The problem is, in my experience, that when I've been on ghost hunts with believers. I mean, I do that all the time. I've been
Sure.
dozen lots of cases. I've been on TV shows, private investigations, public investigations, and so on. And I'm always there again. If I was sure this was all, not true, I wouldn't waste my time. I have better
Well, I like
things
that.
to do.
I like that about you, but I like the fact that you're going there with this side. Like you want. It sound. Tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you want to be proven wrong,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
right? Wouldn't that be wild?
Yeah,
You
well,
know.
this is the thing, right? I mean, in fact, I'll tell you, I was doing an investigation in St. Catharines, Ontario, just outside of Niagara Falls, about an hour south of Toronto, and I was doing investigation at this place, this haunted fort. And there was like we spent a couple days there. It was overnight, freezing cold, like Buffalo in November. Like, whose idea was this?
Sure.
And and I'm talking to this guy, and he's a hardcore believer. He was part of, I think it was called the Golden Horseshoe uh s- ghost hunting groups. There's a in the Golden Horseshoe, again, between Buffalo and Toronto. There's this Niagara Falls and Burlington, lots of ghost hunters there. And I was sort of the token skeptic. And we was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're just chatting. There's cameras all around. We're waiting for something to happen. And at some point, again, we're tired. We're eating lots of Timbits and Tim Hortons coffee, trying to stay awake for this thing because nothing's happening. And I turned to this guy. I'm like, we've been here for 2 days. Nothing's happening, dude. And it's like I'm like, I understand ghosts only perform on command. So, arguably they're arguably entities that are tricksters. They'll do something and they won't do it another time. I said, I get all that, but I said, look, here's the deal. I said, I pointed to there was a big grandfather clock in the room where at Fort Niagara. And I said, look, if we're all here right now, if that clock flew up in the air and flew across the room, I would be a believer in an instant. I would be like, "Yep, I was here. There's no strings attached. I saw this thing fly." I mean, I would be like, This is all it would take." And he's like, "Yeah, I know." And so yeah, it was interesting because it was we're not on camera. We're not having a debate for television. We're just two guys hanging out. We're cold. We're tired. We're both fascinated by ghosts. He believes there's ghosts all around. I'm not so sure that the things he's thinking are ghosts are in fact ghosts. But we're just two guys talking. And
Right.
I'm like, look, this is the problem that I have here is that, I come to these ghost hunts. I see these TV shows. I see all these things. It's all this ambiguous evidence. It's, we set up 5 cameras and this chair did that. Well, okay. I mean, or we set up an EVP and, we record things. And did you hear that? Did you hear that? Oh my God. This would, I'm like, come on, man.
Right. Okay. I mean, listen, I get it. I get what you're saying. But let me ask you this: from your experience from talking to these people, when they say like, "I know what I saw," and you
Yeah.
can't tell me I didn't experience it, how do you respond without dismissing the sort of the emotional reality of that experience for them? How do you
No, that's a
handle
great,
that? How do you handle that
no,
personal?
that's an excellent question, and part of it goes back to my background in psychology. So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I've got a master's in education and public health as well. Not bragging here, but my background in psychology actually helps inform a lot of my investigations. because when you're talking to ghost experiencers, for lack of a better word, for the most part, they're sincere. I can tell you personally, 90% of the people that I've met who have told me about their ghost experiences, I believe them. They're not crazy. They're not lying. I don't think they're hoaxing. They're not. This is not bullshit. They sincerely had some experience. Like I don't doubt that at all. The question is their interpretation of that experience correct? The question is, and we can get into the phenomenology of ghosts, right? We can get into when people report ghosts, what do they mean by that? And that's important. And I think that oftentimes ghost hunters, they sort of elide that. They sort of like ghost, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, take a step back here. What do you mean by ghost? And as different people mean different things by ghost. So to some people, a ghost is a playful little unseen spirit in their house or at work that like moves their keys or turns on the radio when they step out or just does little things like that. To other people, that's not a ghost at all. To other people, a ghost is some sort of like semi-transparent thing that they saw on video camera from informed by TV and things like that.
Right.
So where I'm going with this is that in my experience, the best way to understand these topics is to recognize that the word ghost is a label for an experience, right? Because what is a ghost? Like you can go look, you can Merriam-Webster. I mean, the fact is that I can give you 4 or 5 different definitions of ghost that are mutually exclusive, right? Some
Right.
people think if you subscribe to stone tape theory, it's some event happened, Gettysburg battlefield or some murder, whatever else, and the emotions and the passions seeped into the environment, the trees, the stones, the architecture, the walls, and that are then replayed. Other people say, no, that's not correct. Ghosts are instead interdimensional beings. Other people say, well, no, that's not correct. Ghosts are spirits that can't transition for whatever reason, right? So there's 3 or 4 or 5 or more
Right.
different definitions. And so anyway, to answer your question, part of it is because I recognize that when someone tells me that they see a ghost or they experienced a ghost, it's as an investigator, it's important for me to understand, what do you mean by that? Because I can tell you, and I've done this before. I've been in a room with 5 different people, and they say they all saw a ghost, but if you just talk to them, you're like, oh, 5 people saw ghosts. But if you actually listen to what they say, if you ask questions respectfully and things like that, you realize they're talking about different things. They're not talking about the thing, and it's important to make these distinctions if you're going to investigate. So that's part of it to me, is because I'm coming from a background of psychology, and because it's important for me to understand what's going on, right? So if someone says I saw a ghost, my answer is not no, you didn't. My answer is not that's crazy. My answer is that's interesting. What do you mean by that? Tell me what you experienced. Tell me what you photographed. Tell me what you heard. And let's look at the context and see, is that the most likely explanation for it?
What would constitute meaningful evidence to you of a ghost?
Well, I give one example, which would be, a grandfather clock spinning in the air, flying through the. I mean, that would be
Now,
now.
okay, but all right, I heard you say that before, but let me ask you this: if I showed you video of that, would you believe it? No, you would have to. It sounds like you would have to be there to personally be an eyewitness. Is that
Not
fair to say?
necessarily. Not necessarily. So for example, but I mean, you're asking exactly the right questions, right? Because if you're going to have me or anybody else come on and say, I want evidence for ghosts, it's a fair question to say, what evidence do you want, right? What are you waiting
Yeah,
for, right? What are you
yeah.
looking for?
I'm just curious. Yeah, what would make you
No, no,
personally a believer? Yeah.
it's a valid question. So the broader question is the bulk of the problem really is that the bulk of evidence offered for ghosts, as with evidence for Bigfoot, as evidence for aliens and psychics. I mean, again, I'm not.
Oh, we're gonna get into cryptics. I don't know how much
Yeah, I
time
mean,
we have. I want to get we'll get
well,
down there in a second. But let's talk
here's
about
what I'm
this.
saying is that
Yeah.
in a way they're all of a kind, right? Because in all these cases, what you have is the bulk of the evidence is actually anecdotes. It's stories. It's someone says they saw something. Someone says they heard something. Someone says, and again, maybe they did. I don't know. I wasn't there. The problem is that just eyewitness anecdotes and stories, they're not good evidence. They're just not. Police detectives know this. Psychologists know this.
Right.
So, I mean, just someone said they saw something. My answer is, okay, what do you want me to do with that? Right? Someone says, "Oh, I was camping in the woods last week. I saw something dark and hairy in the woods." Like,
But
okay,
what would
did
make,
you?
but other than you, but again, other than you just being there to eyewitness see the clock fly across the room, what would someone present to you then you would say, well, I guess my job here is done. This exists.
You're right. There's a couple answers to that. One of them is that if you're going to talk about ghosts specifically, right? So I'll give you the grandfather clock I mentioned earlier, right? So why would that not be necessarily be good evidence for ghosts? Right? The answer is that we don't know why that clock flew across the room. Right? Fair enough, right?
Hmm.
So, for
Yes,
example,
correct.
so if someone said to me, so let's say to take this example in Niagara Falls, in Ontario, in the middle of November, about 10, 12 years ago, if that grandfather clock had flown across the room, he would say, "We're in a ghost haunted place. That was clearly a ghost." I would say that might have been a ghost, or it could be that maybe there's a person with psychokinetic abilities, right? People claim to be able to move objects with their mind. Uri Geller, and many other people. So again, this is part of the problem when you're investigating these things: is how do you rule out those explanations? So if someone, and again, this applies to all ghost evidence, right? Whatever it is, whether it's a needle moving or a sound in EVP, whatever it is, could it be a ghost? Sure, anything is possible. The question is, what is the evidence for it? So let me give you one example of what would be considered to be good evidence for EVPs. Let's just take EVPs as a simple
Sure.
example. So good evidence would be uh, you know this, but just for the audience. So EVPs basically are electronic voice phenomena. So these are allegedly voices from the dead, people who are no longer with us. That, well, obviously they can't communicate because they don't have vocal cords and tongues and teeth and things like that. But they communicate through different sounds, static, for example, different devices and so on. So the question then becomes, okay, well, how do we know? How would we know? How could we logically know that we're getting information from the other side? Right? How so there's a couple answers to that. The main answer is information that only that person would know, right? So this Albert Einstein, right? So Einstein is dead. He's been dead for a long time. There are details about Einstein's life that only his biographers know. There are so, or we could pick anybody, someone who died recently.
Well, right. This is
Um,
the Houdini thing, right? Like where he gave a
yeah,
code
yeah,
word or
and
something.
yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Believe, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, but again, so this goes back to your question, right? So if someone presented to me an EVP that was clearly of somebody who was dead. So, I mean, we know they died. If they're notable enough to have an EVP about them, then presumably, there's somebody famous. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, for example, right? So Kennedy died 1963. And if there was an EVP of Kennedy talking about Obama, or Kennedy talking about Trump, or Kennedy talking about some current event that could be proven, right? So this is a current event. This happened yesterday. John F. Kennedy's ghost is presumably still with us, right? I mean, that's the premise, is that ghosts are still with us. They can hear, they know what's going on, they can interact with us, they know about current events. That's often part of the premise,
Right.
right? So
In one definition of it.
sure.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, but that's one example. So or again, if you have, part of the problem is that the vast majority of EVPs are banal things like, Maria, I love you. Get out. murder, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I've listened to, this, right? And so
Yeah, yeah.
this is the problem. This is the problem for ghost hunters who want to hang their evidential hats on EVPs, is that with very few exceptions, I would argue none, but I'm willing to listen to them.
100%.
With very few exceptions, the supposed ghost responses are generic, banal. They're nothing that's identifiable. There's nothing that says, yes, I'm the ghost of this. I died here in 1926. I was shot by, and this is the other question, right? It's like you have all these unsolved homicides, unsolved murders, unsolved disappearances, right? You have it just all over
No,
the place.
I see where you're going with it. I think though, I think we're going too in the weeds on it. I think
Okay.
that I find that when it comes to ghosts, I think even if I presented you, like if I walked up, okay, here's this house I investigated.
Mhm.
Here is 24/7 recordings of the house without anybody in it. We know where all the creaks are. We checked the plumbing. Here's a plumbing report. Here's every noise. Here's a graph of all the EMF readings so we know where all the hot spots are.
Right.
And now here's the differential. Once we did a Ouija board session, we brought a medium in. And look, here's here's some, all these tools using these evidence, right? Then it's like, look, then we captured, here was this room we had the most high def camera possible, like whatever. I'm just making shit up,
Sure.
right? But
Yeah.
we use all this stuff, and it's like there's clearly something. Plus, we have 6 eyewitnesses that we had people sleep in the house. We had a triple blind. We had people go there that didn't know that we were sending them there for a ghost investigate, thing. We sent 3 mediums in there, 3 alleged mediums in there that say they have psychic abilities, and then we sent 3 laymen in there. I had no idea. It was just they thought it was an Airbnb. And then we took their reports of things that all this stuff. We have this testimony before, after, this, that.
Right.
And it was like, wow, something's weird in this house. Like, for all accounts,
Right.
would you believe it unless you experience? I think that's the thing with ghost
Well,
stories. It's
well,
almost like, even if, what my point being, like, I have with the EVP, with the
yeah.
thing, with the EMF reading, with the change, with the reports, and then the differential there, this, that, and the other. I think with ghosts, there's always going to be either yeah, I got to see it to believe it. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, someone other than like a scientist be like, "Wow, did you read this in Scientific Magazine? I guess we solved cancer." They just,
Right.
they're going to take the word of another scientist
Right.
based on
Well,
the test. But there's no test in the ghost world that someone will look at and be like, "Wow, they did it. Wow, I guess there's ghosts." Like, there's just nothing.
well,
Like,
well,
I don't think
but
there's
hold on.
exists.
So there's a couple things. Number one, because of my background in psychology, because I've done this for a long time, unlike most of the ghost hunters, I would actually be more skeptical of my own anecdotes, because I am so aware of how people, including me, including this guy right here, I'm very aware of how we can all misunderstand things and misperceive things. So, in the same way
Right.
that I often talk to ghost hunters who are like, "I know what I saw. I was there." I'm like, "Well, I'm number, okay, I know you were there, but here's the distinction, right? Is that when I talk to ghost hunters, and same thing with Bigfoot sighters and so on, they are so certain of their own infallibility. They are so certain, like, I know what I saw. That's a common phrase. I know what I saw. My
Yeah.
question is, how do you know what you saw? And again, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being sincere,
Right.
right? Because you tell me, like, this is the problem, right? Someone says, "I saw that. I know it's a ghost." How do you know it's a ghost?
Right.
I'm being totally sincere, right? And so I'll give you, so at that same haunted location in Canada, I had a woman come up to me during that shoot. It was like a 3-day shoot, and she's like, "Hey, can you listen to this EVP I recorded?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And I said, "I will listen to your." She had one of those parabolic mirror things, and the whole thing. I
Hmm.
said, "I will listen to whatever you have to say, but first answer me a question." I said, "What do you think you have?" She says, "Well, I have a child ghost. I was in this part of the fort, and it was a couple hours ago, and I listened. And I said, again, being totally sincere, how do you know it's a child ghost?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I know what a human child sounds like. I mean, I know what that sounds like. I know what a human sounds like. I sincerely don't know what a child ghost sounds like. How do you know? How can you be so certain? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm being sincere. How can you be so sure that what you recorded must be a child ghost? Because what are we comparing that to, right?
Right.
For all, I mean, again, being totally sincere, right? For all we know, a child ghost could sound like a donkey. It could sound like a pencil sharpener.
Right.
No, I'm
Right.
being sincere.
No,
We
no,
don't.
I
What
no,
are you
no.
comparing it to, right?
I am listen, I totally agree. I totally
So,
get what you're saying.
anyway, so the wrapper to the story is, and it was interesting because like nobody had ever answered that before. And again, I'm not being a dick. I'm being sincere. Like I will I will listen to your EVP. How can you be so certain that it's what you assume it is? And she sort of thought for a second. She's like, "Well, it just sounds like one." I'm like, okay, that's a fair admission. It sounds like one. But the thing is,
So
the fact is you don't know. But let me circle back to
yeah,
your
no,
original question.
yeah, please.
Yeah, here's the biggest problem that I've encountered, is a lack of baseline, right? So ghost hunters go into a location and they go in. Sometimes they go in during the witching hour. They show up around 8 in the evening. They have lunch, they have dinner, whatever else. They set up cameras at 3 o'clock. They're wandering around doing all sorts of things. So they're there for overnight. 10, 12 hours, whatever it is. The problem is that they don't take the time and effort to establish a valid baseline, right? So they may go there a day ahead. They may take some readings. Here's where this is. This is the temperature, things like that. But in virtually all the cases that I looked at, and I've looked at many of them, the biggest problem is that in order to know what's abnormal or extraordinary, you need to know what's ordinary or normal. And in most cases, and again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Someone wants to send me some stuff I'll look at. But in most cases that I've seen, all the ghost hunters are interested in doing is showing up, doing an overnight thing. We're doing a lockdown. We have video recorders everywhere, all of this. And then it's like, oh, look at this, so the temperature went from, it dropped 10 degrees from between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I'm like, okay, how do you know it doesn't do that every, how
Right.
do you give me something to compare it to? But ghost hunters don't do that for a couple reasons. Number one, it's a lot of time and effort. It's a lot of time and effort to repeatedly go to a location, do valid sampling, establish a baseline, because you have to keep going back, and it's
Yes.
that's science is hard.
Yeah.
Establishing so this is the biggest problem, is that over and over again, ghost hunters don't take the time and the effort and the money to do a valid sample. All they do is they go in, they swoop in, they walk around, they listen to their EVPs, they have these recordings, and we don't have anything to compare that to. So
Right.
just telling me that you heard something at 2:50 in the morning doesn't tell us anything. For all we know, if you had been if you'd been also at 2:50 in the morning to a house 2 blocks away, which is not said to be haunted, you would have heard and seen the same thing. You don't know unless you sample.
Uh, and I want to come back to some of that, talking about today's ghost hunters in a second. But so, and I hear, and you're making total sense. That's why in my example I was talking about here is like a baseline report plus the
Yeah.
abnormalities to it. So you talk a lot about in your books and in your writings and in your essays, you talk a lot about folklore and psychology, as you mentioned already. And I read this book by Mark Eaton called Sensing Spirits. He's a professor. I forget where, but he talked to like 45 investigators. How how much of the ghost belief is in your mind? I think I might even know the answer to it, but is science versus cultural shaping us?
Well,
Like when you talk to the people that
right.
you've talked to, right? Like, you know, is it really just like maybe that woman, so, she thinks it's a kid because that's her background, like whatever she
Right.
does. She might have been a kindergarten teacher for all I know. I'm just making that up. But like,
Yeah.
how much is that? Do you have to weigh that in your investigation, the cultural aspect of these people, what they're bringing to it
Right.
versus what they're taking from it?
No, that's an important question. I'm glad you asked that. There's 2 answers to that. The first answer is it doesn't matter. It does not matter. If ghosts are real, if there is actual ghostly activity, it doesn't matter what the cultural context is. It doesn't matter what the beliefs are. I mean, again, either the grandfather clock flew across the room or it didn't. I mean, that's
Right.
either
Right.
either you're in a poltergeist house and the cupboards are opening and slamming shut, or they're not. It doesn't matter what the belief is. Doesn't matter. So this is the problem: is that in case after case after case, there is not good evidence for it. If there was good evidence, then everybody would be like, it doesn't matter whether the people that report ghosts are atheist, Hindu, Muslim, Christian. It's totally irrelevant because this is an objectively verifiable external phenomena that we can all see, right? Unfortunately, for reasons we can get into, that typically doesn't happen. So then the question becomes, okay, well, because there is this stark lack of evidence, this stark lack of obvious physical evidence, and again, we can get into reasons for that later on. The question becomes, okay, well then we get back to anecdotes. Then we get back to personal experiences, and this is where the psychology comes in, right? Because then you start talking to people, and one of the first things I ask ghost experiencers, I say, first of all, I understand you think it's a ghost. It might be a ghost. I'm not saying it's not. I understand why you think it is. Tell me why. How did you come to that interpretation? Why why do you think this is a ghost instead of someone playing a prank or a psychic nearby who having I don't know. It depends on what the phenomena is, right? So or for example, it'd be like some camera glitch, right? Some surveillance camera. We've all seen this. I was looking at the surveillance camera in my garage last night, and there's this sort of like weird orb flying through this empty garage. No one was in there. I'm like, well, it looks like a bug to me. I mean, it's just IR camera bugs. I mean, these things happen, right? So
Yeah. Oh, sure. Orbs.
or yeah. Don't but again, this is part of the investigation process. Is
Sure.
asking someone again in all sincerity. This is not a gotcha.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's a ghost, right? Why are you assuming that? And so there's a couple answers. Typically they give. And one is the TV. They're fans of taps. They're fans of
Yeah.
these YouTube groups. They're fans of the ghost hunters. And so and this is important, right? Because the question becomes, if you have something weird going on in your house, you have something weird going on in your backyard, your work, whatever it is, why why do you say must be a ghost? And that's a fair question. And usually the answer is, hey, I love the ghost hunters. I saw it on TV, Ghost Adventures, Zach Baggins, all stuff. I saw this on TV, and what they will tell you is that they experienced something or they saw something that resembles something they saw on a TV show that was treated as a ghost. This is important, right? Because they're like, I'm not a scientist. I don't have any degrees. I'm an assistant manager at Target. I'm nobody. But you know what? I saw on TV these ghost hunters. They're showing something that's a lot like what I experienced. That's why I think it's a ghost. And
Do you
this
know
is
who? Do you know Steve Parsons is?
I've heard of the name. Yeah.
Steve Parsons he's a ghost hunter. He's a UK ghost investigator. He's written a couple books. He would say the exact same thing you're saying right now. And I interviewed him, and it was funny because he talks about it. But he's a believer in ghosts, and he does it. And he says how he talks about look. On one hand, these ghost shows are great because they kept the interest in this parascience alive, right? It's
Yeah.
what is for some something's happening. There's a lot of different elements to parascience, and this keeps it going. On the other hand, for him, as someone who does this, when he shows up, when people call him for an investigation, he shows up with a pad and pen because he wants to do an interview and get the personal experience.
Mhm.
And they're wondering where all the gear is.
Yep.
Because
I've
they've
had the
seen
same
it on
thing
TV.
happen. Yeah.
And his book Ghostology is all about listen, this is what this gear is, and this is what it does. And it has nothing to do with ghosts. An EMF is not a ghost detector. It is an electromagnetic field detector.
Preach, Gary, preach.
So he's a believer, right?
Yeah.
So he just explains to you and talks about it, in a way that, listen, if you haven't read it, I think you'd enjoy it. But it's
Yeah, well,
it's right
you
up
have a
there.
believer and a skeptic coming to the exact same conclusion, saying the
Yeah,
same damn thing, right?
it's really like, for me, it's being able to talk to people on both sides is really interesting. To how you look at it, and come to that conclusion. Like, listen, if we all want to see, look, like I said, I've met skeptics already that are just like, it doesn't exist, so
Sure.
don't even try it, and just, let's see it, and it's a joke. But I love your perspective of, yeah, look, I'm skeptical, but I am happy to have this discussion, and I want to be proven wrong. There's a very big
Absolutely.
difference. It's nuanced, but it's different.
Well, I mean,
Um,
yeah, I was just saying, I mean, part of it is that to me, it's interesting either way, and I mean that sincerely, right? So my position is that whether we're talking about ghosts or chupacabras or psychic, whatever else, is that my position is they may exist. They might. I don't know. I sincerely don't know. I don't think so based on the evidence so far, but anything is possible. In science,
so
yeah,
let's talk about the cryptids for a
sure.
second. And is there a difference between people who believe in that wholeheartedly versus ghosts? Like, people who believe in Bigfoot versus are they one and the same, or is there a difference in those types of people,
Well,
in
there's
your
some
experience?
there. Yeah, there's some overlap. Part of it depends. I mean, part of it is, when you ask people why do you believe in it, right? So, and there's lots of research on this. I'm fascinated by that because the question then becomes, you know, we have this ambiguous phenomena, right? So, if Bigfoot was known to exist, they'd be in a zoo, they'd be in the Natural History Museum. We can all go see one, right? Like, hey kids, this is a Bigfoot. This was finally found in 2010. This is where they live. This is their DNA. This is where this is all sorts of things. Same thing with ghosts, right? If we knew for a fact that ghosts existed, we could see them. They'd be in a science museum. Hey kids, this is a ghost. We finally figured out what they were. There's this form of energy. Right. So the point here is that if these things were self-evidently real, then we would all agree on it. There'd be like, yeah, that the grandfather clock flew across the room. There's no other explanation. It's either a ghost or some telekinesis or something else, right? So
Sure.
so the question then becomes whether it's Bigfoot or ghosts or things like that is why, how, what is the evidence that they are interpreting? What is the ambiguous evidence they're interpreting as evidence for Bigfoot or ghost, right? So the question is, where, again, why do they attach that label on that experience? And in some cases, it's because they had personal experiences, right? So we both talked to people. I know what I saw.
Yeah.
I was going down this hallway, and this with this EVP, and I heard something, I saw something, and so a lot of times it's personal experience. In a lot of cases, it is informed, as we were talking about a second ago, by pop culture, by horror films, by the Conjuring films, by TV shows, by ghost hunters, and so on. And so it's important to try and parse that out, because those influences, as he was talking about, Parsons was talking about before, they're very much there. So, I think one difference is that, I mean, just off the top of my head, is that Bigfoot believers, and believers in cryptids tend to be men.
Oh,
That field is overwhelmingly dominated by men. Usually, we're gonna, weekend warriors. I'm gonna go out and find me a Bigfoot. All right.
why do
Whereas,
you think, why do you think that is?
I think there's a
Is there
couple
a
reasons.
type? Is there a
Uh,
type that you've
yeah, I mean, it's. I wouldn't read too much into it, but there's definitely a case in which,
because we're the
um,
dumber species?
yeah, well, there's part of that. Well, there's the other aspect of this is that, as you know, with ghost hunting, that blends very much into psychics, because you mentioned before, right? So oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes in ghost investigations, they will bring in a medium. They'll bring in a
Yeah.
psychic to communicate with a ghost, to try and get feelings, this and that. So that adds, and I talk about this in my book, right? That's a bad idea because you are exponentially complicating matters because psychics have not been proven to exist. And we can talk about that all you want, but the fact is that you can't use one unproven technique to to prove a second unproven idea. You simply
Right,
can't
right,
do it. So
right.
so this is part of the problem. So anyway, getting back to the gender issue is that because it's the same thing. So again, typically believers in Bigfoot and Chupacabras and Mothman, those people who are interested are men. The
Mostly men.
ones in most cases,
Sure.
and it's different with psychics. For example, oftentimes psychics have women's intuition. You have women are more empathic. They're more sensitive. Some of the world's top mediums are mostly women, and sometimes
Yep.
and gay men. Tyler Henry and others as well. James Van
Mhm.
Prague. So again, that's not good or bad. It's just that's just the
The stats that we know.
demographics. Yeah.
Right. The stats that we currently know, for sure.
Anyway,
Right. No, sorry.
it's like I'm just having fun talking to you.
No, I love it. So, has there ever been? Well, just before we go, so you know where my head is a little bit on this stuff. It's in what I've discovered. It's look, I don't know what spirits are. I don't know what's happening when it happens. I do. There's been a couple people that have said a couple things to me that have stuck with me to help me keep an open mind. One guy was Dan Sturgis, an investigator, who pointed out, like, we didn't even know how lightning worked until we had the high-speed camera, right? It might just be something we haven't figured out yet. And that was recent. That's fairly recent science, in tech. That's one thing, in terms of
Well,
checking out how.
I would argue that we did have a pretty good idea of how. I mean, so here's the thing about that analogy, and I've heard that analogy before. People have known about lightning for centuries.
Sure.
Of course. Benjamin Frank. Right? No, but this is the important part of this. Is like
Okay.
is that in science we didn't know the details about lightning. So scientists may have only, and that's how science works. The more you learn, the more studies you get the details. But there's an important distinction here: is that no one doubted the lightning existed, whereas people do doubt. I mean, there's clear evidence of lightning. We've all seen it.
No,
Unlike ghosts, unlike Bigfoot.
But I would listen. I would tack on to that what you're just talking about. We knew how lightning works, but before they figured out what it was, they thought it was from the gods. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, there was a progression of
how far back you go, yeah.
But I'm saying there was a progression, slow as it may be, to realizing that it is not a supernatural thing, and this is what it was. So, that's all my point.
With germ theory, with the plague.
Yes, absolutely. So that's just for me. And I do buy into something about, we don't understand what consciousness is. We don't really know how the brain works. We know there's electrical synapses in our brain, but we don't know consciousness and what it is. And I do buy into this idea of what you just said, to tack on to what you just said, why it made me think of it, like intuition, right? We all get, and I feel that there is, look, if you're we use this example all the time. When you're in a bar and somebody walks in, it can give you a bad vibe. Like, that's something, that dude's not cool. Like, there's something wrong. Like, we all have that, flight or fight.
Right.
There's a reason for it. There is a ingrained intuition. And do I feel that maybe some people are more intuitive than others? Absolutely. Just like I think some people are more physiologically better and become professional athletes than others. I compare these things. I think there is something to that. I don't know what that is. That's my journey with this, talking to different people, right? And I don't know how to measure it. I don't know how to prove it. So that's kind of the fun of this and talking about it.
Well, but again, I mean, I would say, I mean, with consciousness, I mean, I've heard that a lot. It's like people, well, psychics probably exist because we don't know everything about how the brain works.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, we don't know.
We can't prove it. Can't prove it negatively or positively.
No, but it's called an argument from ignorance. It's
fair enough.
It's saying we don't know X. That's not logical. You can't say we don't know all about X, therefore psychics are real. We don't know. Well,
I'm not saying that.
No, I understand. I'm just saying it's a slippery slope there.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and I agree with that completely. We don't know. I know the experiences I've had with certain psychics more than others. Now that I've been doing this, has been for the life of me can't figure out certain things. I've had people listen to the recordings of me with a psychic to see, like, are they playing me? How did they do it? Because I didn't notice, and I haven't figured it out. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah. It's just sort of, but I know, of course, there are charlatans. There's the cold reading charlatan that's out there versus somebody else who does it. But again, it's like, you're right. It is not a proof of psychic mediumship, but for me, that keeps my mind open to, okay, how can we get to a place of that? Has there ever been a mystery you've investigated or a legend outside of like the caves you talked about earlier? Especially with like cryptids or monsters that surprised you once you dug into it. I don't mean surprised you in a way of like, wow, this could be a monster. I mean, or just surprised you like, holy Christ, it was this little kid in this village walking around with footprint and he had bigger feet than everybody else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like anything
no.
that's sort of fun?
Yeah,
Anything
there's been a couple. I mean, it's a case of where, I've done this a long time. I've been doing this for 20 years or so, and of course, all sorts of books, investigations, and my podcast, and like that. So, I'm drawing upon a pretty broad stuff. So I would say one of my favorites would be I did a book called Lake Monster Mysteries. I wrote it with the late Joe Nickel, and it came out maybe 10, 15 years ago. And so we looked at lake monsters around the world, including, of course, Loch Ness and
Yeah, dude.
Champ and like
And yeah, sturgeons are monsters.
sturgeon.
That is a monster.
They are absolutely
It's-
right. If you've never seen a sturgeon up close, if you're not a fisherman, yeah. So here's the thing. So I was one of my chapters in that book is about a monster called Lake Cressy in Lake Crescent, Newfoundland, in a town called Robert's Arm. And if you go there, it's a beautiful little town. It's very picturesque. Population is like 5, depending on whether Joe's in town or not. But it's this cute little town, and it's adorable. And as you go into it, there's a little sculpture, not a big sculpture, saying "Welcome to Robert's Arm." Anyway, I was there investigating the local lake monster, and before I went there, I did my due diligence. I was reading reports and saying, okay, what are people describing and who the witnesses and so on. And so I went there, and I again, there's 5 people in town, so I stayed at the hotel, and I said hi, and I said, so I want to. Can you tell me about Cressy, the local monster? She's like, oh yeah, they're happy to tell you. And I said, well, I've noticed. I'm just talking to the local guy. He's been there forever. He grew up there. He hasn't wandered more than 10 feet from where he was born. And I said, I've noticed that unlike a lot of other lake monsters I've researched, this one, it's the descriptions are very consistent. Typically this sort of like smooth, shiny surface. There's a couple distinctive humps, but there's no like ridge or anything like that, and nothing distinctive about the head. So I'll be honest with you, this sounds like eel. I said, are there any eel in the lake? He's like, oh yeah, there's huge eel. They're like, there's as big as your thigh. I'm like, do you think I'm just spitballing here. Do you think your local lake monster might be an eel? He's like, oh yeah, it could be. It's like, all right.
That's fun. So they're having some fun. It's just sort of part of the legend.
Yeah,
I see that. And listen, look, for me, this is going to be weird to say. I am probably more apt to believe in ghosts than I am to believe in Bigfoot.
Interesting. A lot of people would say the opposite. Why is that?
I just feel like again, I don't, and I'm using in my definition of ghost, as you said, there's multiple definitions. I tend to think if it is anything, it is somehow consciousness, possibly stuck to energy of some kind. There's something. It's just, it sounds strange, but like the theory is my nephew has his theory, which again, it's you would call it like an ignorant theory because you can't prove it, but it's this idea that listen, energy can't be created or destroyed. What happens to this energy in our body when we pass? It has to go somewhere, and we don't know what consciousness is. So is it memory? Is there a transfer of that to something? I don't know if it'll ever be proven or how it is, but I'm more apt to believe that we are in touch with something on that level than a Bigfoot that we can't find. But with that said, I can certainly believe that there might be something in the ocean depths that we haven't found yet or seen.
I would believe that.
Is it a monster? I think a great white shark is a fucking monster.
Right.
Like I think Australia is Monster Island.
I've been there. They got spiders that will. They
got things. Everything there wants to kill you. So it's like I am certainly apt to believe that there is something in the ocean that we don't know what it is. Well, we'll just, eventually we might discover it because it's just insane. But it's fun. So listen. First of all, Benjamin, thank you so much for taking the time. I got a couple more questions for
Yeah,
you
yeah,
here.
it's
This
fine.
has been
This is
uh,
fun talking to you. I always enjoy, I get interviewed by people, and honestly, most of the time, they 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 don't know anything about the topic. So it's really refreshing to actually talk to somebody and have a more than superficial
then
discussion.
my
So
work is me fooling you is work then, because I'm still learning about the topic. But I
there
try
you
to read
go.
everything, and I certainly your books are on my list to read for as I roll into 2026. I've just been reading so like here look like right now I'm reading this is what I'm on right now.
No, it's a classic.
You're right. So yeah, it's a class. So I'm trying to get my head around it all. Um, Let me ask you this as we wrap this up here. So, what do you think the paranormal community could learn from skeptics? And then, what do you think skeptics can learn from the paranormal community?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I've always been an advocate for forever of more dialogue between between so-called skeptics and believers. I've always found conversations like this to be interesting, useful. There's a quote that says, if you don't understand your opponent's position, you don't understand your own. And that's true. You need to understand what does the other. I mean, this is not antagonistic, hostile. It's like, hey, we're all interested in these things, right? Bigfoot, ghosts, weird shit. Like this is inherently interesting. We're spending time on this. We're talking about where people are listening to us talk about this. So I think on one level we're all on the same page because I'm sincere in my search for ghosts. I'm not. I sincerely want to find. I want to find Bigfoot. I want to find real psychics, right? So the question then becomes, how can how can how can we work together to sort of refine these sorts of things? So to answer your question, I would say that the biggest thing that I think that the ghost hunting community and the paranormal community in general could learn from skeptics is to apply a more science based perspective. Is to say, okay, again, I was talking that before about baselines, right? So
Mhm.
instead of just, hey, I'm a ghost hunter, I'm going to go in some place, I'm going to walk around for a couple hours with the recorders and stuff, and then go away and survey the footage. Understand that in order to do this scientifically, it's a lot more work. You need to establish a baseline. You verify facts. You need to if you're gonna bring in psychics and mediums, test them beforehand, right? Have them come in blind. So say bring them to a location and say, okay, don't give them any clues. Just say, okay, is there a ghost here? Yes or no? And if so, what is the ghost? Just bring them in separately so they're not talking to each other. Bring into an unknown location, and I can tell you what'll happen. I can tell you what'll happen because I've done this. Is the psychics will either come up with nothing or they'll give you completely different stories. Oh yeah, there's a little girl named Maria, and she died here about 20 years ago in a fire. And then someone else will say, you don't bring him in the same room, you bring in a different psychic, like, "Yeah, there's an old man, there's only one ghost," and they'll give you totally different, different information. Anyway, so long story short, I would say that the main thing that I would hope that ghost hunters, investigators could learn from skeptics is, again, more understanding the methodology, research design, right? Research design. How do you conduct an experiment? How do you do research? And I'm not being sarcastic. The problem is that most people, the average layperson, and again, I'm not being mean. This is skeptics and believers. They don't know how to investigate. That's not what they do. It's not their investigation is it's a skill set. There's a reason why FBI investigators and police investigators are trained. They don't just pull them off the street. They don't just put a magnetometer in their hand and tell them to look for ghosts. They train them in methodologies. So that would be my thing is recognizing and appreciating that there are actual scientific methodologies that can be applied to ghost hunting, and I've written about that in my book and do that. And when skeptics are offering a different perspective, a respectful perspective, engage with them. Say, "Hey, maybe you're right. How can we up our game so that people are more responsive and believing in the evidence we're finding?" And conversely, I would think that the one of the things that skeptics can learn from believers and the ghosting and paranormal communities is to recognize that there's not one blanket. Um, it's not a homogenous group, right? There are people people come from all sorts of different perspectives. Some people, the reason they believe in ghosts is because their grandmother passed away and they're very close to them. And, and skeptics can learn to be more diplomatic. And instead of having the sort of abrasive, dismissive, wet blanket, you know, perspective, say, no, okay, well, hold on here. Um, Oftentimes believers, there's a reason they believe these things. They're not lying to you. They're not hoaxing. They're not trying to pull pranks. Some of them are clickbait. I mean, I got suspicions about how sincere Zach Baggins is, for example. I'm not getting into that. But most people, they're sincere, right? And so I would say one thing that the skeptics could learn is to give more respect to eyewitnesses, to believers, and so on.
It's great. Yeah, listen, I don't know. I had one of the producers of Ghost Adventures is a good friend of mine. He was on the show, and he's he's an award-winning documentarian. So he got into the paranormal from the production side of it from a very straight place. From coming at to being he's done documentaries about Tupac and Biggie to the Sisters of Ukraine, which is on Amazon right now.
Mhm.
This guy is very straightforward, and he's like, "Listen, I'm filming this stuff. I'm just capturing it. We're not faking it. And there is a constraint to television production, as I know very well. That's my background. So,
Right.
and I understand that. And speaking to so I can't speak to. I don't know Zach. I'd love to get Zach on and talk to him about it, but it's like I can't speak to his validity or not, or I believe he's a believer, and I find that when you say that really interesting because I had James Underdown. I did an interview with him that we're
Mhm.
going to be doing, and you know him, and
Oh, yeah.
and he said to us, for his big $500,000 cash prize, the amount of people that come in are trying to pull the wool over his eyes and fake it is zero.
Mhm.
It's like they're believers,
Yeah.
and so that's an interesting, the way it's wild to me, right? Like this is where it's coming from. Um, for you know, what do you think then is if you could leave our listeners here with one practical tool for thinking more clearly about mysteries, what would you tell them?
That's a good I mean, there's several. I would say probably if I was gonna give one piece of advice, I mean, I'd give you a dozen, but it would be one I touched on earlier, which is to recognize that when you're investigating mysteries, that these words that are thrown around as if everybody agrees what they are, ghosts. News for you. People don't agree on what ghosts are. We don't know what ghosts are. We literally don't know what ghosts are. We have a cultural script about what ghosts are. There's different dictionary definitions, Bigfoots and so on, things like that. So I would say that that one piece of advice would be to recognize that when someone uses the word ghost, when someone uses the word Bigfoot, they're describing, it's a label for an experience. They they're it's a convenient, socially recognized label, and that's an important distinction because you can't investigate a label, but you can investigate an experience. So instead of saying, "Well, how do we prove that ghosts exist?" Back up a whole second. Investigate each case specifically. So because I have proven that specific ghosts don't exist. In other words, there are specific cases, not all ghosts. There are specific cases, and I can list a dozen off the top of my head, where something was believed to be a ghost that was later proven pretty much by everybody that was not a ghost. So I disproved that one
Right.
ghost
Situation.
case, that one
Right.
situation, right? I have never claimed that disproves all ghosts. You have to case them on a case-by-case basis, and you have to recognize that people are describing to you their experiences, and there may be more than one explanation for that experience. So instead of just leaping to, "Oh, it's a ghost," what does that mean? Even if you're right, here's the thing, even if
Right.
you're right, if someone says, "There's a ghost in my house," and even if you're right, that gets us nowhere. Because we don't know what that doesn't that just kicks the can down the road because then the question is, what do you mean by ghost? what is a ghost, right? And so again, is it stone tape theory? Is it the spirits of those who, and so on. So I would say, question your assumptions. Take a step back instead of lurching into trying to prove that this place is full of ghosts. Take a step back and look at what people are actually claiming. Take a step back and look at people what actually experiencing. And once you do that, you recognize that there's other explanations that aren't ghosts.
Ben, tell the good people where to find you and follow you online or anywhere. Where
I'm around and about. I have a podcast called Squaring the Strange. It's available on all the major platforms. I've written a couple books on ghosts, including Investigating Ghosts and Scientific Paranormal Investigation. I have another book coming out next year on mysteries in New Mexico, my home state. So there's even a couple ghost investigations in that case. So I'm around and about. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter every now and then.
Are you? What's your handle?
At BT Radford.
At BT Radford.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Benjamin, thank you so much for being on Splintered Spirits. This is a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me on. This has been super fun. I'll be happy to come on some another time and talk more about it. Let's do it.
Well, that's it for another episode of Splintered Spirits. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay curious.